After another whoop or two, the next noise we heard was the wildest, most frightening scream I've ever heard in my life. Then we heard massive, heavy footsteps approaching our location on the logging road. The footsteps were slow at first and gradually picked up pace. The steps were also distinctly bipedal. This creature continued screaming as it approached. Eventually it broke into a full sprint and ran right past our tents, so close that the wind from its speed rustled the side of our tents. On this special episode of Bigfoot Society, I share from the files of anonymous Bigfoot reports that have been sent directly to me. So sit back, relax, and enjoy some Bigfoot reports that have never been heard before. And thanks for listening. Well, welcome back to a very special episode of Bigfoot Society. As I had said in the intro, I don't do many of these where I just talk to myself. It's kind of like the old days when I would be recording it in the car while I was driving Uber. For those diehard Bigfoot Society listeners, you remember those episodes at the beginning. Also, you can hear the police car driving by me in the background, all that good stuff. They're crazy episodes. Anyways, this is going to be the first of a series, and I'm going to call these Anonymous Bigfoot Encounters. So let me give you a little bit background. So here's the deal. So I get a ton of DMs in my email, TikTok, Instagram, all over the place. Constantly, I have people saying, hey, I've got a story. I want to share it with you. To the point that I even set up a forum on BigfootSocietyPodcast.com. Share your Sasquatch encounter. Or is it share your Bigfoot encounter? It's one of the two, guys. You'll find it. It's low down on the page. Anyways, you've got a Bigfoot encounter story that's happened to you. Fill out your contact info. Fill out as many details as you can about this story, what happened to you. Send it in. It allows me to share it on the website. But I've got some really special encounters that have been sent in to me tonight. And these are ones where people have mostly talked to me directly. Because I'll be honest, it takes a ton of talking to people that are trustworthy enough to share their story with me to find someone that is actually willing to come on the podcast. If you listen to people that are sharing their stories on this podcast, imagine the ratio is about 30-1 for people that do not want to come on air. Now, I realize that, hey, maybe I should start asking these people that won't come on air. Maybe they would be willing for me to be able to share their story as an anonymous source. Thankfully, there were more than a few that did say okay to that. So without further ado, I would love to share with you Volume 1 of Anonymous Bigfoot Encounters from Bigfoot Society. Here we go. Literally, I'm going to be reading these to you. So if you love being read Bigfoot Encounters, you're really going to love this. And this will be a series as I get more and more accounts, encounters in my email or using the form. Using the form on the website is the number one preferred way to submit your report. So please use the form on BigfootSocietyPodcast.com. As people use that more, I'll get more reports, and then I'll release a volume 2, volume 3, etc. Let's go for it. This first one is a person from TikTok. Here we go. Okay, I'm willing to tell my story as long as I stay anonymous. This was back in the early 2000s, I'd say around 2008 to 2009. Myself, my now husband, and his best friend of many years, well, we decided to go fishing after work. We lived in a small town on the coast of Oregon, right off of Highway 26. We decided to go up one of the rivers that was located just off of Highway 26 and try our luck in a fishing spot. We pulled down a dirt road across the bridge, went down an embankment, and started fishing. Neither of us were having much luck after about 2 hours, so we decided to take a different approach and try a different section of the river that was further east up Highway 26. As we pulled up to this river, we pulled over on the right-hand side and had to cross the highway to get to the other side of the bridge, walk down another embankment to get to the waterfront, cross the river to a bend, and there was a really nice pool to fish, so I started fishing there. I had to make a phone call, so I paused fishing. While I was on the phone, my husband and his friend decided to walk around the bend, further upriver into the forest away from the road. Now I started hearing a bird or whistling sounds coming up from behind me, and I didn't think anything of it. I continued my conversation on the phone about 10 minutes later. But then I heard my husband and his friend yelling to run. I have no idea what's going on at this point, so I tell the person I'm on the phone with I have to go. And I hang up and grab all my gear, and I see both my husband and his friend running around the bend of the river towards me, telling me, "Go, run." I'm asking them, "Hey, what's wrong? What's going on?" And all I'm getting is just run, run. We saw something and it threw rocks at us, just run. And so we have all of our gear and we run across the river and we run up the embankment and my fishing pole gets stuck on a tree and my husband tells me, "Just leave it." And I said, "No, this is my favorite pole." I then get it unhooked and proceed up to the bridge, and my husband grabs me and points me towards the river where I was just standing and says, "Look." I then turn and look at this very man-like creature covered in hair standing in the river where I was just fishing, and he raises his arm up almost as if he's waving. Whatever I saw that day had to have been almost 8 to 9 feet tall. It was very dark brown in color. And I'm not realizing what I had just seen and what had just happened. We immediately get back in the car and head back to the original fishing spot, which is a few miles down the road. And I'm asking my husband and his friend what was going on. What did we just see? What happened? And they proceeded to tell me that they had boulders, and I mean not rocks, but boulders, larger than dinner plates being thrown at them out of the bushes, and these bushes are a good 10 feet tall. And something was throwing them about 20 feet in their direction at them. And they're hearing noises and having these boulders thrown at them, and they proceed to take off because they don't know what's going on. And then we get back to your first original fishing spot because apparently we're gluttons for punishment. And we see what looks like several fish. Now keep in mind, this is a very rural area. It's an old logging road, and that's not being used anymore. There were no other people around us. There's a pile of fish that have been ripped apart. I'd say a good 12 smaller salmon on the other side of the bank that had just been torn apart. And after seeing that, we decide we're done fishing for the day. So we just pack up and go home and never go back. Highway 26 in Northern Oregon is terrifying. Anonymous. When I was talking to that person via TikTok, her encounter was intense, to say the least. If you've had an encounter that sounds like that around the Highway 26 area of Northern Oregon, I would love to hear about it. Please send me in your encounter using the Share Your Bigfoot Encounter form over at BigfootSocietyPodcast.com. Let's head on to the next report. The next report is a fun one. It's really fun. I begged this person to come on the podcast. I've never begged someone so much to come on Bigfoot Society. Because when you hear this, you're like, why don't you have this guy? Guys, I tried really, really hard. And maybe if they hear this, they'll say, you know what? He really did want me on, and you'll come on, and I welcome you. But let's share this encounter. One of my favorites I've ever received. Here we go. One place I heard whoops every morning at sunrise was the Mount St. Helens area. It was after the mountain blew. The government created a blue zone and a red zone around the mountain. Only people with purpose could enter the zones. The red zone bordered the blowdown area, but I had a red zone card. We were a fire trail digging crew working at Mosquito Meadows near Mount St. Helens, just outside the blast zone in the timber. We arrived every morning before sunrise. As the sun was rising, the birds began to chirp. We always heard whoops. I couldn't figure out what kind of bird would make that sound and blew it off, keeping my curiosity to myself. It wasn't until the Bigfoot shows began that I realized the whoops were Sasquatch. I figured it was a young juvenile amused watching 5 goofy young humans dig a fire trail. I've heard whoops in other locations, but this is the only location I remember the exact location. I was all over the Gifford-Pinchot district, which also borders Mount Rainier National Park and the Mount St. Helens Forest Service District. It always seemed to be right at sunrise when the birds began to chirp, and after an hour or so, the whoops went away. But it was consistent every morning, especially when the weather was nice. Within an hour, the power saws started up, and the sun was up in full, and you didn't notice the whoops anymore. Anonymous on Facebook. It would have been the best interview I've ever done because to talk to the gentleman was amazing. That's the information I'm allowed to share. I can, he also shared photos of himself at the time period, which clearly proved that he was who he said he was. It was fantastic. Can't share those photos. Our next report comes from northeastern Minnesota. My husband and I were up a long ways on the Gunflint Trail, and I wanted to walk in a ways and do some tree knocking. We walked in a long path made by a truck, likely a hunter, and I made a couple of really loud knocks. One was seriously loud, and we waited. After a couple minutes, it got shockingly quiet, whereas before, tons of birds could be heard singing. I got this super eerie feeling, but I didn't see anything, and I just felt kind of terrified, so we left. Another time, which was last year, we were foraging in the woods along a river. I can't remember the spot, but it was in the county that's below Sherburne County. There was a walk-in campsite along the river and a man-made trail or deer that led off into the woods there, so I decided to walk it. And as I got in further, I heard a big rock hit the water. I got freaked a little bit, but thought, nah. I kept going in further and heard another one, really loud. This was a wide river from the rain and flooding, and the opposite bank was far away. I tried to see if there was an island in the middle of the river, but there wasn't, so I decided to get the heck out of there. Anonymous. The next report states, I was in a field playing football with some friends as the sun was going down. We look up at the hill about 100 feet away, and at first I thought it was a bear. But then I said, bears don't stand on 2 legs, and I started to get a strange feeling. As I thought, why is this man staring at us play football? And then my brain kind of put it together. Now this is where it gets crazy. I didn't remember this until almost a year later. I contacted one of my friends. The memories started to come back to him around the same time. I made sure not to tell him the story and have him tell it to me so I knew I wasn't crazy. They're far more advanced than what people actually think. Anonymous. The next report is from the website. I was mushroom hunting in eastern Tennessee, just minding my own business. I heard the leaves crinkling and whipped my head around. Nothing. I looked away. Right in front of me was the most terrifying creature I'd ever seen. It looked at me with curiosity. It backed away as I pulled out my pocket knife. It ran faster than you could ever imagine. After it ran away, I hopped in my truck and drove home. I got to thinking, and then I realized that it was what I thought. A legend, a myth. Bigfoot. Anonymous. Next report When I was at a rental property in an out-of-the-way small town near the Bay of Fundy in New Brunswick, I was woken up by a knocking at the window. When I looked, I saw a face in the darkness with a dark, rough skin and fur along the edges. The creature had teeth like a bear and was pounding its fists against the window until I turned the light on, at which point it darted off into the forest surrounding the house. The house was raised and the window had 7 or more feet off the ground outside. Anonymous. These next reports are not anonymous. They come from Rex B from the Wasatch Sasquatch YouTube channel, and you can head over to that channel to see videos that have to do with the reports. But he was kind enough to send some over. Now, I've submitted these to the BFRO, but imagine it will never see the light of day since it wasn't what they call a Class A encounter or an actual sighting. So I'll submit it to you in a similar format that I gave to them. Number 1, October 15th, 2022. Hiking down from doing landscape photography, I normally like to wait as long as possible before using a headlamp. It had become too dark to see effectively, so I turned on a bright headlamp maybe an hour earlier. At one point, being well past halfway back down the trail to the vehicle, I thought, I heard something on the right-hand side of the trail. It sounded like maybe a few rocks were thrown, or some type of sharp, short, but rather nondescript noises. I turned my headlamp to look in that direction as I continued down the trail. Moments later, we were presented with a loud bruh or bruff sound from the side of the trail that the little noises came from. After listening to the audio again, to me the noise seemed to sound like it could possibly include lips vibrating and not just a simple growl or hoofed animal in rut. This happened twice, and I happened to have a small video recorder designed to place in a hip pocket. So I pulled it out and managed to record the third time the sound was made. I've tried to find examples of moose and other animals that might sound similar. I do not believe the examples I found are deep enough or have enough bass to sound particularly similar. If needed, I can provide a recording. It sounded like whatever it was not far away. Maybe not more than 50 or so feet away. Still, I could see nothing, but only heard noises. We decided to keep walking. After a brief pause and only a few more steps down the trail, we heard a sound of a deer bounding away immediately on the other side of the trail. Did we interrupt a potential hunting ambush? Unknown, but unusual. After 7 p.m., sun had been down for maybe an hour. We were hiking down from Silver Glance Lake. You have Tibble Fork Reservoir. From there, drive up an elevation, park at Silver Flat Reservoir, hike further up an elevation to Silver Lake, then take a more seldom used, steeper trail to finish at Silver Glance Lake, which elevation is a little shy of 10,000 feet. We were hiking back down from Silver Lake and had not yet reached where the trail gets a little closer to a couple campgrounds, Kimball and Noble, neither of which is accessible from the trail without bushwhacking. Looking on a satellite image, I imagine we must have had the encounter roughly where the trail goes between 2 patches of coniferous forest. For the most part, aspen trees line the trail at the elevation we were at, roughly 7,800 feet. Added note, I believe no hunting is allowed around this immediate area. At least I have never heard weapons fired nearby. It's hunting season right now. Mountain aspen forest is the environment with occasional mixed pine trees. There are creek crossings, but not at all in this particular junction in the trail. Lastly, an older potential encounter from the winter of 2014 to 2015 in Little Cottonwood Canyon. Hiking down the Lake Blanche Trail on the evening of January 10th, 2015. I went on the hike to do some landscape photography. However, the weather conditions turned out not to be the best. It was overcast, misty, and started to snow. Earlier, when it was still light out, I had attempted to go off trail in an attempt to speed up my descent down the trail. However, this turned out to be a bad idea, as I was literally in snow past my waist and almost to my chest, struggling to move. It took longer than I would have liked to be able to regain the trail again. When the interaction occurred, it had been dark about an hour. It took place somewhere around the bottom half of the trail, and I was the last person on the trail and had not seen any other hikers since being near the lake. It had begun snowing at that elevation, and later I found it was still raining at lower elevations in the valley. I did not have on spikes for my boots and it had been all right hiking uphill on the snow, but suddenly I slipped on the downhill slope hiking back down. I took a good crashing fall and landed on my shoulder. As I got up and dusted the snow off myself, I muttered with some minor aggression. That instant, all of a sudden, I heard an urgent sounding whoop woo off in the distance, the other side of the creek that parallels the trail. An owl vocalization? Maybe? It would have sounded more calm, more quiet, mechanical sounding. Also, it did not sound like a dog, coyote, or a person. It immediately could be recognized as, and did very much resemble, some sort of non-human form of primate. I heard no other sounds that evening, but it sent a virtual chill up my spine that lasted with me the rest of the hike. Again, if those encounters were interesting to you, check out the Wasatch Sasquatch YouTube channel for more. Continuing on, our next encounter takes place over on the East Coast in the state of North Carolina. I used to work for an environmental conservation nonprofit that partnered with the U.S. Forest Service on special restoration projects in various national forests in the Southeast. In the year 2016, our group was stationed in the southern Nantahala Wilderness Area, a subsection of the Nantahala National Forest near Franklin, North Carolina. We set up our camp along an old logging road downhill from a trail known as the Lower Ridge Trail, and were set to stay there for 1 week. The first night, we noted that there was some sort of owl living in the trees behind our tents. This is important later. Due to the physically taxing nature of our work and the fact that it got dark so early in the evening under the tree canopy, we would typically be in our tents ready for sleep by 8 p.m. We had no disturbances for the first night or two, but around the third night or so, I woke up in the middle of the night and heard some rustling around downhill from our camp where we had stored our food in a bear hang in bear canisters. And at first I thought it was just a squirrel or some nocturnal animal, but it sounded different the more I listened. There was a rhythmic pattern to the rustling, leading me to believe it may have been a larger animal. I listened a little more, heard some grunting noises, and determined it was likely a bear. I woke up 2 of my colleagues to investigate, and we grabbed some trail tools for weapons and walked to our food storage area. Looked around but found nothing and saw nothing. Now around 2 nights later, we had gone to our tents around the normal time, and we'd grown used to hearing the owl and the noise of other insects as we fell asleep. But on this night, just after it became completely dark in the woods, all the typical noise of the forest, owls and insects included, went completely quiet all at once, and from a distance, we heard what I now recognize as a Bigfoot whoop. Now, it sounded strange, but we thought it could be another owl or the same one that had flown off. After about another whoop or two, the next noise we heard was the wildest, most frightening scream I've ever heard in my life. And then we heard massive, heavy footsteps approaching our location on the logging road. The footsteps were slow at first and gradually picked up pace. The steps were also distinctly bipedal. This creature continued screaming as it approached. Eventually, it broke into a full sprint and ran right past our tents, so close that the wind from its speed rustled the sides of them. Beside our campsite was a dried-up creek bed. This creature ran to the creek bed and began throwing boulders around. These were not small rocks, but literal boulders based on the sound of it, screaming the whole time. It's important to note that no wildlife in that area could possibly pick up and throw boulders without opposable thumbs and the dexterity to use them. Then all at once it stopped, and neither me or my colleagues wanted to get out of our tents to investigate because we were so scared. One of my colleagues literally cried herself to sleep that night. Because we were all so tired from our work, we eventually fell asleep, but not nearly as quick as we normally did, obviously. The next morning, we searched for tracks or other evidence, but found nothing. And I suspect there were no tracks because the logging road was so hard and compacted from previous years of use. At that time, we had no suspicion of it being a Bigfoot. We sort of chalked it up to an unexplained occurrence and went about our lives. In the years since, however, after developing an interest in Bigfoot and listening to various podcasts, listening to vocalizations, hearing other encounters, I'm now realizing that we were likely visited by a Bigfoot that week. Anonymous, North Carolina. The next encounter / interview, you'll see what I mean in a bit, is from TikTok. Individual who wants to be known as Ken. I tried to get Ken on the podcast a lot. Thankfully, he was at least okay with me sharing our conversation through this, in the hopes that someone else has experienced something like it and it helps them work through things. It's a weird one. Let's continue. I don't live up there no more. Keep in mind, I'm just going to read this the way that it's written, so bear with me. I don't live up there no more, but I got given 59 acres of land and kept getting messed with, stuff thrown at us, trees put in front of our trailer door, and we had a stream that we did our dishes in, and something was in them. There was this big hairy man. He saw me and ran, and I tried everything to catch up to it and had no chance at all. And me and my brother, we walked the land and found around 34 rock piles. The Native Americans used to leave their graves, and we tried moving them, and they were so big of rocks that broke the come-alongs, and no way a machine could get where they were, so something big did it. We had branches tossed at us and felt like we were watched and so much more. And I'm 6'4", and this thing was a lot bigger and just pushed the trees like nothing. And I could run real fast, but nothing like that. It's in St. Albans, Maine, on land that's never been lived on in the middle of nowhere, like an hour or something from Canada. Question for myself, what did the shape of the creature's head look like? Like a black rock. Bulky, hairy, with a weird odor like a wet dog that swam in excrement. My question, how tall would you say? Answer, a lot taller than me, like 8 to 9 feet. Question, do you ever hear any strange noises around that property? Answer, well, we had our trailer up on 12 jacks, and around 10:30 at night, the whole trailer got hit and pushed off all the jacks, and when we went out back, there was this weird growl. So I thought it was a bear, but something hit above our kitchen window like it was a shoulder, and there was a huge footprint, but when I went to take a picture, my son had jumped on it and Question, have you ever found any strangely killed animals around your property? Answer, oh yeah. Weird growls and others I can't explain. When asked people around the area, everyone said Bigfoot, which I don't believe yet. Then this stuff happened when I looked it up and said Bigfoot. Then I saw it once next to the stream, and I was going to throw my dirty dishes. And once we went for a walk deep in the woods, and my son saw something move, and we looked. Didn't see nothing, so we started walking towards it to see, and this thing just jumped like 8 feet across the stream and ran like it was nothing. And we would find deer ripped apart and bones scattered around, and me and my brother had guns on us one time walking, and we found a bear's head fresh, but no body, which was just weird, and we had sticks and rocks thrown at us, but didn't see nothing. And pretty much I tried telling some friends, but people called me crazy till they came and tried to camp in my area, and now those friends believe. I live in Georgia now. Haven't been up there for a while, but the house I built on the property is completely ripped apart overnight somehow. And I know where the graveyard is and would love to unbury it to see what's under it. You know how Native Americans used to bury? That's how this was in the middle of nowhere with big boulders on it. A perfect stack of like 30 of them. And you could barely get a dirt bike to it. No mind heavy machines. Ken. And you can guess how much that hurt not to have Ken come on the podcast. I would love to get Ken on for an interview, but we take what we can get. And man, if people have had stuff like that happen up around the St. Albans, Maine area, I want to hear it. So please submit your Bigfoot encounter over at BigfootSocietyPodcast.com. I'm going to finish up this volume 1 with an interesting thing that was sent to me a while back. And a listener said, I took pictures of this. I saw it on the wall of Black Diamond Bakery in Black Diamond, Washington. This is really interesting. So this is Black Diamond Bakery in the Sasquatch. How the recipe for Sasquatch bread was discovered. I've never heard this story outside of these two photos of it's a very old paper that this is on. Extremely old, and it's hanging on the wall in this bakery. If you go to Black Diamond, Washington, you can see it. But I'm going to read it to you. One day in late September, many years ago, I was hunting in the headwaters of the Cedar River. It was starting to get dark, and I figured it was about time for me to head back. It was miles back to civilization, and the nights were getting cold at that altitude. I must have stepped on a loose rock or something, because the last thing I remember was rolling and sliding down a steep slope of shale and alders. And there may be some that will doubt the truth of the rest of this narrative because of the bizarre circumstances. I have never told my story before for this very reason. At any rate, when I regained consciousness, which must have been days later, I found myself lying on a crude bed of cedar boughs as a sort of cave in the rocks, and I soon discovered that several bones had been broken, including some in my head, which may explain my peculiar behavior since. My broken arms and legs had been set, and rough splints had been fastened in place with strips of rawhide. I could see some sort of passage leading to what must have been another cave deeper in the mountains. Sometime later, I heard a sound from the inner cave and felt certain that someone or something was watching me. After a few more minutes, a huge man-like creature came over and looked down at me. At first, I was frightened to death, but soon learned that he meant me no harm. As soon as he saw that I was awake, he went away and came back with a sort of bowl full of some kind of tea and a huge loaf of what looked like old-fashioned bread. The tea was kind of bitter, but the bread was delicious. And after I had eaten, he took what was left and went away. And this went on for many days, and I began to recover from my fall. By the time I was able to walk a little, I had made it out to the mouth of the cave and saw that winter had set in, and there was no way to get back home until spring. During the months of winter, I learned that there were more than one of these huge but gentle creatures. They were very shy, and it wasn't until almost spring that I saw what was obviously the daughter of my benefactor. She was tall and of wondrous proportions. In spite of her savage ancestry, she was really quite gentle, and we grew quite fond of each other. Her name was Tari. Tari had learned a few words of English by listening from the bushes near where people were picnicking down in the lowlands. We were soon able to talk after a fashion. Tari showed me how the Sasquatch bread was made and baked in a rock oven in the cave. I always suspected that some of the grain was requisitioned from the lowland farmers at night, but was afraid to ask. Tari said I would have never recovered except for this powerful mixture of whole grain and honey. She said that if ordinary people were to eat too much of it, they would become boisterous and rowdy. Spring came and a decision had to be made about Tori. I knew she would never be happy with the little people down in the valley, so I decided to go home for some supplies and stuff and then return to her forever. This is a mistake I was to regret for the rest of my life. When I returned to the mountains, something had frightened my Tori and her people away, and although I had searched for all these years, no trace of them can be found except for one big footprint. So now, in memory of my Tori, I've decided to let a little of that marvelous bread of hers be made for the little people. Just a little at first, and if you can handle it and keep your cool, maybe a little more later on. Interesting story, right? No way it can be real. Well, I have no idea. But seriously, what I did do is I did actually look up Black Diamond Bakery in Black Diamond, Washington, which is a real place and it's been around for like 100 years. So I gave him a call, and older lady picked up the phone, and I was like, hey, my name's Jeremiah. Weird question. Someone took a picture of an account about your Sasquatch bread that's on your wall, and I just wanted to know if that's like, if it's a real story or what's the deal with that? And she was like, oh yeah, that's us. I was down in the basement one day, and there were all these papers strewn about in the corner. I started looking at them all, and I found these yellowed pieces of paper, which is the story that was written about our Sasquatch bread. So I laminated them and put them on the wall. And I was like, that's fantastic. Do you know anything about like who wrote it or if it's real? And she was like, no other history, just something I found in the basement. So, hey, you never know. This could be a real story. Maybe it's not. It's a fun story. If any listeners know more about the Black Diamond Bakery history and the Sasquatch bread and who would have written this, please contact me. You can contact me, BigfootSociety@gmail.com. And we've had a fun first volume 1 of Anonymous Bigfoot Encounters. You're always welcome to submit your encounter if you'd like me to read it on the podcast. Just go to BigfootSocietyPodcast.com, fill out the Submit Your Bigfoot Encounter, which is a little lower on the screen. Become a supporting member of the Bigfoot Society podcast by going to www.patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society and receive extra episodes and early ad-free episodes as well. If you've got a personal Bigfoot encounter you would like to submit for me to share on the podcast, please head on over to www.BigfootSocietyPodcast.com. There you'll find the Share Your Bigfoot Encounter form a little lower on the page, and please take a minute to share as many details as you can. Please state if the encounter is anonymous or what name you would like associated with the encounter. And as always, thanks for listening.